the bottom. Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Zenker, one of the authors with stories in the newly released Running Wild Anthology, Volume 8. I'm interviewing the story authors to give some background and additional content into the stories appearing there. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Eric Lehman. Welcome, Eric.
Hello, Gary. How are you?
I am excellent. How are you doing?
Excellent. Yes, it's a good day.
Good. So let me just read a little bit of your biography. You're the author or editor of 22 books, slacker, including New England at 400, A History of Connecticut, Food, Literary Connecticut, and Afoot in Connecticut, Journeys in Natural History. So you're from California, right? You've been nominated for Pushcarts. Your biography of Charles Stratton becoming Tom Thumb won a Henry Russell Hitchcock Award from the Victorian Society of America and was chosen as one of the American Library Association's Outstanding University Press Books of the Year. You have a revolutionary history book, Homegrown Terror, Benedict Arnold and the Burning of New London, which was a finalist itself in two categories in the Next Gen Indie Book Awards and was used in a question on Jeopardy. Well, that's very cool, right?
Greatest honor, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to read all this because honestly, it
Yeah,
would take up all of our time to read all of your credits.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
22 books. That's pretty
Yeah,
incredible.
22 published under
Published.
my name. So
Okay,
yes,
so there are more. There are just some that aren't published under your name or aren't published.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
very,
Yep,
very
I
interesting.
try to keep busy.
Okay, so these look like what you're telling me, these look like they are nonfiction. Am I correct?
I have a nonfiction. I've got a couple novels. Yeah. There's one, Shadows of Paris, that won a bunch of awards. So
So
yeah, that
so let's start this conversation a little differently. You clearly write a lot of different things, and I'm
yes,
assuming
sir.
you write different lengths as well. Some of the authors I talk to the novelists can't imagine writing something shorter than 30 or 40,000 words. Some people can't imagine writing more than 1,000 words. How is it when you do that? Do you have a different mindset? Do you have a different way of preparing for it? Um, how is it that you prepare yourself for writing a short story versus something that's novel length?
Yeah, I mean, that's really something that I've tried to concentrate on as a writer. And you can see all these different modes that I'm writing in. I try to look at each thing as a challenge. And I think that
Great.
um, idea of having a challenge with each, what am I trying to do with this short story or this novel or this history book? Um, these questions lead me to find solutions, and it's sort of a problem solving approach to being a writer. These, the story I wrote for Running Wild is, I was thinking of a specific character and a problem, and then trying to solve it. It could have turned out to be a novel if it had turned out that this character had more to say, but then it didn't. And so I realized that it was just a short story and kept it there. Yeah.
That's
I
very interesting. But let me ask you a question. Are there conditions under which you would say, well, it's not, I did the short story version, but you know what? I think this is a novella. I think this is something else. Or do you throw it away once you're done with it?
um if it's published, I throw it away,
Okay.
so to speak.
Okay.
But I have revisited my novel Nine Lupine Road was originally a very short story, almost like a flash fiction. And I realized that there was so much more about this character that was really interesting. And I expanded it, turned into a novel with another character and the interplay with them. So I have done that in the past, yes. But often I know when I start, I'm going to write a short story about whatever, the sport of curling, or something, a certain place and a certain time, and then it develops from there.
So, do I take it from what you just described that you're a plotter as opposed to a pantser?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh, Although I find if I too heavily plot it, it ends up killing it for me because then I've thought the whole thing through,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So, then it's done in my mind, and then it's very difficult to finish on the page. A short story, maybe I can still do, but a novel, I really have to just follow where the characters are going for a while. Usually, when I'm about a third of the way through, I'll know what the ending is,
Okay.
and then I'll be like, okay, I got to get from here to here. How am I going to do that? And then I write the rest.
Do you do character profiles or anything else to help yourself when you're writing longer format?
Occasionally, I'll certainly use note cards
Hmm.
and map it all out that way. That's a way of plotting it that can be shifted around, right? And you can
Right.
move it all around, and and then I have the characters, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to introduce this new character. How's that going to fit with everything? And you reshuffle. So I do it that way. Um, that seems to help me sometimes. But again, if I do it too much, it kills it for me.
Okay. So it ruins the exploration that you're having with the character.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part of writing for you personally?
Hmm. Hardest part of writing.
Answering these questions?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the author life, not the writing life. The
Yeah.
writing life is fun. The author life can get a little challenging sometimes. But I think not getting started, when I get started, everything's great. The first, if I'm writing a novel, the first 10,000 words. If I'm writing a short story, the first
Mhm.
1,000 words. Like once I have that, it keeps going and I
Okay.
finish. But I'll have an idea and turning that into something real, getting past the first page and to 10 pages or 100 pages,
Mhm.
that's the tough part. And then once I get that, then I want to finish, I'm really
Okay.
committed at that point. So,
Let's explore just a little bit about what you said, author's life versus writer's life.
mhm.
Tell me how they're different because you said one is harder than the other.
Yeah, sure. So,
Tell
you know,
us.
everybody wants to be a writer, but then being an author is a totally different thing. You have to do interviews like this. You have to go and give readings. You have to constantly uh, be promoting your work in different ways. Um, some people don't like that. I really enjoyed that, but I did it for about 12 years, and I burned out a little bit
Hmm.
after doing it. You give like 30 presentations a year. I'm doing history books mostly, but so it's not even just a reading. You're doing a PowerPoint, you're presenting
Right.
sometimes to four people in the basement of a library. Sometimes I was presenting to like 200 people at the Mohegan Sun Casino.
Right.
So like it really was a challenge to keep up with that and to keep yourself reminding yourself why you're there. You're not there. I mean, yes, you're there to sell books, so to speak, but why did I get into this in the first place? Well, I got in it to tell great stories, nonfiction and fiction stories. So that you have to continually remind yourself of that and why you're doing what you're doing.
Is there something that you'd want to tell us about the weirdest or most unusual thing you've ever written?
I don't know. The most unusual thing I've ever written.
Because sometimes they're not weird things, but it's unusual. And that could just be unusual for you. It might not be unusual to everyone, but
Yeah. I mean, my novel Nine Lupine Road was pretty weird. It's a werewolf novel. It's a mystery. It's an FBI. It's about Jack Kerouac and werewolves. So that's
okay.
pretty weird. Um, but I didn't think it was weird when I was writing it. it
Right.
seemed like a natural outgrowth of several ideas that I had. So, I mean, oh, that's tough. That's a tough one. I guess I think the weirdest thing I've done was write narratives for other people's books. So my name's in the book, I've also done ghostwriting, but doing the narrative of, their names in the front. It's a photography book or whatever. I'm revising a book right now. So like you finish it. I'm very proud of my work. Books comes out. I don't really care that my name's not on the front. I read it. My name's in the inside.
Right.
Um, that is a weird experience because then I'm not promoting the book. I have
Right.
nothing to do with the book after that. The other person's out there doing that work. And so it's a strange, somebody just emailed me about one of these books the other day and was like, I have had this book for 3 years. I didn't know you had written the inside. I didn't pay attention to that, and I had just been enjoying this. And I was like, yes, it's a very strange thing for me too, to have that kind of writing out there,
That's
which you've
interesting.
done.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. It's kind of like I do advertising and marketing, right? So
There you go. Yeah.
I, I have an
Name's not on it.
attachment to it because I want it to be great, but no one's ever going to associate my name with it, right?
Right.
What
Yeah,
what
exactly.
my team will associate with it is the results. Does it bring in sales? Does it bring in people who ask more questions? So maybe it's a little like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you got to be proud of your creative work that you've put into this. I mean, I've done some advertising too, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It's, but it's a very different feeling than uh, being an author, going to the store, seeing your name on it,
Yeah,
giving
every
a
time someone
reading,
wants to take my
having
words, right?
fans.
Someone technical wants to
Yeah,
take the words, I take the rule and go, no, no, don't touch those words. No.
that's
And
right.
I'm not always right that they shouldn't touch them, right? But that's how I feel.
Right. Right.
Tell me about let's talk about this story that's in the book now.
Mhm.
Can you give us a short synopsis, one sentence or two sentences, without any spoilers on it?
Yeah, ambitious young writer moves to a small town and gets his comeuppance, I
Okay,
guess.
very nice, very nice. In the case of this story, how long did it take you to write it?
Um, well, I got a good story about the writing this
Okay,
short
good.
story
Tell us.
because I it takes place in Brattleboro, Vermont, at and it has to do with the Kipling House. That's the name of the story, right? The Kipling Lamp is the name of the story. But I stayed at the Kipling House. You can stay there. It's like a bed and breakfast. So some friends of mine and I rented it out, and I wrote this story at Rudyard Kipling's desk in that house in Brattleboro, Vermont. So, I mean, I polished it later,
Right.
and edited it and added a little bit to it. But I wrote most of the first draft at his desk, in Vermont. Yeah,
That is a great story.
yeah. So, that's why I'm very happy it's going to be published in this anthology because
Right.
it's just like it I was there with friends. Kipling's Kipling had lived in America for about 10 years at this house, and he then had all these problems with his brother-in-law. He was going to come back eventually, but his daughter died, and so he didn't manage to come back. But so he left a bunch of his stuff there. So like you can play pool on his billiards table up in the attic, which I did, of course. And so it's really, really a cool place. It's owned by some land trust, and they rent it out. It's a different idea. We don't usually have that idea of, but in England and in other places, you can like sometimes stay in houses that famous folks, including writers, stayed in. So that's the guy who started this program in Vermont was one of and I was like, this is a fantastic idea. Why don't we have this at more places?
Yeah, they don't.
Um,
They turn them into museums. I think I was at the Margaret Mead House,
yeah,
and it's a museum, right? There's no way they're going to let you in. They only want you to touch things.
they could really make, I did the Mark Twain House is here in Connecticut, and they do have a program where you can go and write in like Mark Twain's library. You like pony
Okay.
up $50 and you spend like 4 hours writing
Uh-huh.
in his library. So I've done that too. But it's a really, really cool idea that more places should really get into because they're losing. Because think of all the young writers, like the guy in
Right.
my story, who would be like, ah, I'm going to go and, I want to do this. I want to write where Hemingway wrote or wherever. So,
So I
yeah.
take it this was an easy story to write for you.
Yeah, it was the Kipling lamp. I think the lamp is in the house. I don't even actually remember now, but there was at least a picture of the lamp. And I just wanted to, I was like, there's a lamp. It's got all this, you know, Arabian Nights, sort
Mhm.
of thing going here. How can this be a story? What if I was not who I am now when I went to the Kipling house, but right out of college and full of myself, how would I feel about these things? So, and that's where the story came from.
How, what do you use as tools to write? Do you use a keyboard? Do you use pen and paper? Do you use voice recordings? How do you typically write?
I use all those things, but in the case of this story, it was pen and paper. I had a notebook with me and I wrote longhand, and then I transfer it into the computer, and then it expands at that point and gets edited and shuffled around. I would say I would do that at least half the time. But I have used audio. Um, I found long car rides, like
Yeah.
especially nonfiction, I'm able to do it with audio. Sometimes if I have ideas for essays or articles, things like that, that's something I can do with audio very easily. And
So what?
sometimes though I just write chapters on the computer.
Mhm.
I'm able to do that, especially with longer pieces like novels. Um, but a lot of longhand for the other stuff, even novellas. I had a novella published in one of Running Wild's earlier anthologies. I wrote all that longhand and then I
Okay.
transferred it in. Yeah.
So I have a question for you related to that. I find when I write, I use all the methods, right? I find that my writing is different when I'm doing hand pen versus talking into a recorder versus keyboard, right? When I write by hand, when I talk into the recorder, my sentence I'm closer to my finished sentence than when I type. When I type, for some reason, because it's coming out so fast, those are the things that are more loose. Whereas I guess I'm slowed down because my hand can't write fast enough because I can't really talk fast enough. Do you find there's a difference, not just quality, but the way you're writing? Do you find it's different depending, or maybe
Probably, yeah. But it all gets smoothed back into my
like,
style when I edit it, and when I revise and make the final drafts. So, but I wonder, I guess I should have AI or something look at two stories that I've done in those two different ways and look at it. But I think I smooth it out into my normal style. Yeah.
I would bet you do, right? It's just I've written entire things voice and had very
Mm.
few edits because
Oh.
it slowed me down and my thinking slowed down. And so I was more reluctant to put a sentence down until I constructed it better or what I'll call
Mm.
better. But I was just
Mhm.
wondering if you had that experience. Um, it sounds like you're a pretty disciplined, write every day kind of person, but am I wrong about that?
I mean, not every day, you know. It depends. I'll like many writers, I'll go through periods where I'm not writing as much and
Mhm.
I'm just sort of slowed down. Um, I think I do too much and then I burn out. So like during the pandemic, I was like, oh boy, I'm just gonna sit here and pound a couple things out. And then I kind of burned out. And by 2022, I was like, boy, I just wrote like the equivalent of, 5 books. So I'm just gonna slow down now. And I spent a year where I only wrote some short stories and, a novella or something like that. And now I'm getting back into it again over the past year. So I think that is a natural cycle that writers should not be afraid of, you know.
Right.
Some people panic when they're like, "Oh my God, I haven't written anything for 3 months," blah. Um, but I think that's natural. I think your imagination needs to take a break the same way your body needs to take a break, um, or whatever. So I think that is. But when I'm writing and when I'm trying to finish a book, for example, I can be very disciplined about that. I remember the New England at 400 that you mentioned. I had it like mapped out over 6 months. Like, here's exactly what I'm going to do, and here I'm going to
Right.
finish. I had 40 chapters. I'm going to finish a chapter every 3 days,
Wow.
and or 4 days, I forget what it was. And I did that. And then I had it mapped out. So that's discipline, I guess. Yeah.
That's
So
very disciplined. Is there
yeah.
anything else to close out? Is there anything else you'd want us to know about you that we didn't talk about that you think either enhances the story or gives people a perspective on the author that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, I think a lot of my stories and even my nonfiction sometimes comes from a place of wanting to explore as a writer. And I think as a lot of your readers are going to be writers, and I think that you have to have a fearlessness with that to try to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to create a character who is the opposite of me, or I'm going to create a story about something that I am not happy with. Um, you know, you really have to get into that stuff because that's where the real fun comes, and that's where you grow as a writer, and that's where your story has a better chance of being something that lasts. So I guess that's
That's
my
good.
philosophy, and that's what I'd love to impart to the listeners here.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for today. We'll close it out
Thank
with,
you.
and hopefully everyone will both buy the book and read your story.
Thanks, Gary.